He was 20 years old when he became king. 22 when he led his first major campaign into Persia. By the time he was 32, he had conquered more of the known world than any human being in history. And he never lost a battle, not one. Not against Persia. Not against the armies of the Middle East. Not against the warriors of Central Asia. Not against the war elephants of India. In 13 years of continuous warfare across 11,000 miles of territory, Alexander III of Macedon lost 0 battles. So today we're going to answer the question that military historians have debated for over 2,000 years. How? Alexander was born in 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, a kingdom in northern Greece that most Athenians considered half barbarian, more frontier than civilization. His father was Philip II, one of the greatest military reformers in history, who had already transformed Macedonia from a backwater kingdom into the dominant military power in Greece. His mother was Olympias, fierce, ambitious, and by most accounts deeply formidable. And his tutor, from the age of 13, was Aristotle. Let that land for a moment. The greatest military commander in history was personally educated by the greatest philosopher in history. Aristotle taught Alexander medicine, philosophy, rhetoric, science, and, crucially, the geography and politics of the Persian Empire that Alexander would one day conquer. But Alexander didn't just inherit ambition. He inherited a military machine that his father had spent 20 years perfecting. And then he made it faster. To understand Alexander's tactics, you first need to understand what he was working with. Philip II had created something new in the ancient world. A professional, full-time standing army. Not farmers who picked up spears when called. Soldiers who trained every day, all year, for years. The centerpiece was the Macedonian phalanx. Similar to the Greek phalanx we saw at Thermopylae, but built around a weapon called the sarissa. An 18-foot pike. Nearly twice as long as anything the Persians carried. When a Macedonian phalanx locked shields and lowered its sarissas, the front 5 rows all had their pikes reaching past the front line. Any enemy facing them was looking at a wall of steel points before they got within sword range. The phalanx was a battering ram. Almost impenetrable from the front. But the phalanx had a weakness. It was slow. And it needed flat, open ground to function. This is where Alexander's genius came in. On the wings of the phalanx, Alexander placed his companion cavalry, the finest heavy cavalry in the ancient world. Elite horsemen, trained to move in tight wedge formations at full gallop, strike at precise points, and exploit any gap in an enemy line with devastating speed. The phalanx held. The cavalry killed. But it was how Alexander used them together that changed everything. 2 years later, 331 BC. The plains of Gaugamela in what is now northern Iraq. Darius had rebuilt his army. This time, estimates put the Persian force at 200,000 to 250,000 men. He had also added a new weapon, 200 scythe chariots, war machines with blades attached to the wheels, designed to tear through infantry formations. And this time, Darius had chosen completely open, flat ground he had personally leveled and prepared. Ground where Alexander's oblique attack couldn't use terrain as an ally. Ground designed to allow Persian numbers to simply envelop the Macedonian force on both sides. The Persian line was so wide it extended far beyond both ends of Alexander's army. On paper, it looked like a certain encirclement. The night before the battle, Alexander's generals urged him to attack at night, to neutralize the Persian numerical advantage under cover of darkness. Alexander refused. He reportedly said, "I will not steal my victory." He wanted to defeat Persia in full daylight. In plain sight. So that no one could ever question it. When the battle began, Alexander did something that baffled Darius immediately. He marched his entire army to the right. Steadily. Continuously. Not charging. Just moving right. The Persian left wing had to keep extending to match him, or risk Alexander marching around their flank entirely. They stretched. They thinned. And the Persian formation, in trying to compensate, created a gap. That was the moment Alexander had engineered from the opening move. The companion cavalry formed their wedge. Alexander lowered his lance. They drove straight into the gap at full gallop, turned inward, and headed, again, directly for Darius. And for the second time in 2 years, Darius fled. The greatest empire on earth collapsed at Gaugamela. Within months, Alexander would enter Persepolis, the Persian capital, as its conqueror. At 25 years old. Military historians have spent centuries trying to explain what made Alexander unbeatable. The answer comes down to 5 qualities that almost never existed in one commander. First, intelligence. Alexander gathered information before every battle, often scouting the terrain himself. He usually knew more about the battlefield than his enemies. Second, speed. His army moved faster than anyone believed possible, reaching key locations before opponents could react. Speed became one of his greatest weapons. Third, leadership. Alexander fought at the front, leading the decisive charge himself. His soldiers weren't following a distant general, they were following a king who fought beside them. That inspired unmatched morale. Fourth, adaptability. No 2 battles were the same. Alexander adjusted his tactics to every situation. His famous oblique attack was a guiding principle, not a fixed plan. Finally, psychological warfare. He knew victory wasn't just about destroying an army, it was about breaking its spirit. By targeting Darius at Issus and Gaugamela, he shattered Persian morale. Once the king fled, the battle was effectively over. Combine all 5 qualities in one commander, and you get a military record that remains unmatched. But here's what the legend often leaves out. Alexander was not just a military machine. He was a deeply complicated human being. And his genius had a cost that fell on everyone around him. His closest friend, perhaps the person he loved most in the world, was a man named Hephaestion, who served as his second-in-command. When Hephaestion died of illness in 324 BC, Alexander's grief was so extreme that ancient sources say he lay beside the body for 2 days, refusing to speak. He ordered the horses' manes cut in mourning. He crucified the physician who had failed to save him. He launched a military campaign. Some historians believe, partly in an attempt to outrun his own grief. At the Hyphasis River in India, after 8 years of continuous warfare, his soldiers refused to march further. For the first time in his life, Alexander faced a mutiny, not from enemies, but from the men who loved him. Men who had followed him across 11,000 miles and finally, simply, wanted to go home. He tried to shame them. He tried to inspire them. He went to his tent for 3 days, hoping they'd change their minds. They didn't. And Alexander, for the only time in his life, turned back. He died less than 2 years later. Babylon. 323 BC. 32 years old. The cause is still debated: fever, poisoning, the accumulated punishment of a body that had been wounded repeatedly across 13 years of combat. He had been stabbed, shot with arrows, struck with rocks. He had a lung pierced by a spear in India. He had never slowed down. Until he couldn't move at all. Alexander's conquests didn't just change political maps. They changed the world's cultural DNA. The Hellenistic age he created, the spread of Greek language, philosophy, architecture, and science across the Middle East, Central Asia, and into India, shaped every civilization that came after it. The Roman generals who came after Alexander studied his battles. Napoleon studied his battles. The military academies of the modern world still study his battles. The oblique attack didn't die with Alexander. Hannibal used a version of it at Cannae. Frederick the Great used it at Leuthen. It appears in modern combined arms doctrine, the same principle of pinning the center and striking the flank, just with tanks and air support instead of sarissas and cavalry. He was 22 years old the first time he rode into battle against the Persian Empire. He looked at an army 3 times larger than his own, at terrain he'd never seen before, and he saw exactly where the gap would open before anyone else in his army could see it. That's not just tactics. That's genius. Alexander the Great never lost a battle in 13 years of continuous warfare. The oblique attack, the companion cavalry, the personal leadership at the decisive moment, it was a system that redefined what a military force could do.